Welcome to Blue Steel Talks, and we are going to be talking about stock options, a boring but extremely important topic in new companies and in functioning ones.
First of all, Dave, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. I am going to be behind the scenes, so there's going to be a few questions for you. Before we start, Dave, can you please give a brief background history on what you do and what you did in the last 40 years?
I am a serial entrepreneur. I have started several companies, three of which have been successful. Two of those have been sold to people who were in the same business area, great profit, and one is ongoing as we speak today. So my experience in this area is long and painful.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing that, Dave. Now, I have a few questions for you, and the first one goes, how do stock options work in practice, and why do so many employees misunderstood the true value of their equity?
To use the old line from Marx, the purpose of stock options is worker ownership of the means of production. And though I'm saying that somewhat with tongue in cheek, it is for the large part true. The purpose of stock options is to incentivize employees to stay with the company and to work hard and to do a good job for the company, because there's two upsides that a company has. It makes money, and when it is sold, it brings in a lot of money. The latter goes to the shareholders. And if the employees are shareholders, that's so much the better for them. They misunderstand several things. One of the things they misunderstand is the difference between a stock option and a share of stock. And the answer is a stock option is the ability, but not the requirement, to purchase the share of stock at some future date. And companies do that because they give the options to their employees, but they don't have to charge them anything at that point, only when they buy them. And those will vest over a period of time. They are important to the employees because they are showing future worth. They're not showing present worth. They can't vote. They're not getting any money from distributions like dividends and things like that. That only occurs to people who actually own the stock. But it is the promise of future equity that they often misunderstand. I want to share with you something that I've been working on for a long time that is very important to me, and that is a Discord channel for business. On it, there will be a lot of free information, but also access to me. So you can have the ability to ask me questions, and I can respond to your particular problems and difficulties, and also help you get started. I'm really looking forward to being able to interact with you individually on there. I look forward to seeing everybody on there, and I will be waiting for you. Now, let's get back to our video.
What are the most common mistakes startups make when structuring employee stock option plan, and how can they be avoided?
Well, I can certainly vouch for them because I probably made all of them at one time or another. The first problem that people make is they think that everybody who's in the founding group should get the same amount of stock. This is ridiculous because people certainly don't bring the same amount to the company. So that's mistake number one, is they tend to try to make everybody equal. Don't do that. The second thing that they try to do is to be either too stingy or too generous. Mm-hmm. They don't understand how much of the company should go to whom. The founding team starts out owning the entire company. Mm-hmm. It's not proportioned evenly. The CEO will almost always, like virtually always, get the larger share. Although, for example, the most recent company, I had like 4% less than the guy who was the CEO because I didn't want to be CEO. And that was fine. We agreed on that. If a major mistake that is made, besides the too generous, too cheap, is not doing any at all. Just trying to hold on to the ownership of the company yourself. That, especially in a high-tech environment, is terrible demotivator for your people because they can go to work for Microsoft and get stock. And so that's a mistake that people tend to make. It's more of a problem on the East Coast with more old line company type views than it is on the West Coast. But on the West Coast, it's a fatal mistake.
So if you're too generous as a company, how will that impact you? Isn't that a good thing to be generous?
It's a good thing to be generous up to a point. One, you will wind up with, over time, you will wind up with too many shareholders that many of whom are not there anymore. And so now you have to deal with all of this. Well, the problem is when you get too many shareholders, there's all sorts of legal requirements that come in, and you've got difficulties because of that. In terms of the amount, it is traditional that around 15% of the company is set aside for non-executive employees. Non-executive means not the CEO and the people who are, CFO, CIO, those sorts of level. That it's about 15%, and it's different depending upon what the job is. I mean, a senior engineer gets more stock than an engineer, for example. So if you give out too much stock, you won't have any left to give to the next generation, because there will be a next generation if the company is successful, or to continue to motivate somebody. If you give them all the stock up front that you're ever going to give them, you can't give them more stock. So eventually they're going to vest all that stock, meaning I'll get to vesting in a minute. Well, you're going to vest all that stock. Now you have no motivation. They could leave right then and get everything they're going to get from the company. You don't want that to happen. You want this to be a hook that holds on to them. That's the point of it.
Is there a way you could revoke an employee's stock or maybe take it back after giving it?
No.
So you're legally
Unless
obligated.
it's agreed to at the time. So, for example, the way I have generally done it is the founders buy their stock outright, because when you start up a company, the stock is very, very, very cheap. You buy the stock outright. That starts the clock on capital gains treatments with the federal government. And that's a really good thing to do. It also gives you the right to vote the shares. So the ownership gives you those two things, among other things. I have generally done that, where the founders will buy the stock. But say a founder doesn't work out, how do you get that stock back? You have a written provision that was made at the time that says, whatever the vesting plan is that we have for people who are given stock options, we get to buy back at that rate from you. Now, now is a good time to discuss what a vesting plan looks like. You don't want someone to be given the stock up front and have no recourse. So what you do, you also don't want somebody who just doesn't work out for 6 weeks to have any stock, because you're going to have to be tracing them down for the next 20 years trying to get their proxies and all that sort of crap. You don't want to do that. So what most companies do is some fraction of the stock is held back and doesn't vest until the end of a year, typically a quarter. So over a period of 4 years, they'll get all of their stock options and are able to purchase them if they want to. 1/4 of those are held till the end of the first year, and then they vest all at once. Now, this means that you have had plenty of time to decide whether this person is good. Don't use that as the excuse to get rid of somebody on day 364. First of all, you're going to get sued. And second of all, that just isn't fair. If they've been there that long, give them their stock. Even if you don't have to give it to them. So you give it to them 1/4 at the end of a year, and then 1/48 of the total options over the next 3 years after that. Now, as you get close to the time when all of that stock is vested, and by vested it means they can actually purchase it and become beneficial owners of it, which means they get long-term capital gains treatment starts, and they get the right to vote, among other things. As you get close to that period of time, you will give a good employee more options, and a really good employee a lot more options often. That's one reason why you don't overdo it at the first, because you're going to give more later, and you can make that clear to them that you don't say, I'm going to give you more later. That's a contract, and you may not carry it out. But if you say it's generally the company's policy that we keep people vesting, so that say 3 years in, you give them some more stock options, so they're always vesting about the same or more stock. That's by far the best motivator, because there's never a clear-cut time for them to leave and optimize things. If you have a 4-year period and 4 years comes and they get all their stock, That's the time they're going to leave if they're going to.
And long enough, those employees will have their voice heard. The more the stocks they earn. Is that correct?
Yes, although an employee's influence is more dependent on how well they're doing their job than it is on how much stock that they own. The company gives stock to employees not so they can make money off of the employees buying the stock, and not so that the employees can vote the stock. They don't have enough stock to vote. The founders and the financiers and the board and everything have the stock that controls the company. That's not the reason you do it. You do it to motivate the employee with the promise of future wealth.
Dave, you mentioned about employees being unmotivated if you give them the stocks flat out. Why is that?
If you give them,
If you give them stocks right off the bat.
oh, they're motivated because they've already got the future reward. I mean, if you give them the stock with no buyback provision, they could leave tomorrow, and they'll have every bit as much as they'll have if they stay 20 years, and that's a serious mistake. You want them always thinking that if I do a good job now, my net worth in the future will be higher, both because I'll vest more stock and because I'll make the company worth more.
So that was the part about if a company's too generous. Now, what if a company's too stingy about their stocks?
Then the ability to motivate the employees goes away. If they don't, if a person doesn't have enough motivation, two things will occur. First of all, they'll probably feel cheated if they have any experience especially the high tech world. And number two is another company will hire them away with a better stock offer. And so that's a real demotivator for you to be too stingy.
I see.
And that 15% rule is not hardcore. Usually, as time goes by, more of the stock is owned by the employees, simply because you have the good employees have stayed and you've been giving them new options every year, and you've also expanded and hired new employees, and so the fraction goes up.
Yeah. What are the tax implications of receiving and exercising stock options?
The federal government comes and goes over what they think they should do in terms of taxes on the options. If the options look in any way like actual compensation, in other words, the equivalent of money being paid out. So, in other words, instead of giving you a $100,000 raise here, I'm going to give you these number of stock options at this lowered price below the market value. That's compensation, and the federal government's going to tax them. Now you've really screwed them because they don't have the money to offset that tax burden. So you don't do that.
Yes.
And the federal government makes it that's a real no-no. So that's number one. Number two is there is no tax consequences. Other than that, there's no tax consequences from having options. There are tax consequences for having stock if there's income associated with it and distributions associated with it, or there's a sale of the company stock externally and everybody's allowed to pool into that. All of those things become, well, you bring income in, so you have to pay taxes on it. If you held it for more than a year beneficially, meaning you have exercised the options, paid the money, and gone from there, you have a beneficial ownership, so you will participate in that. And if you've held it for a year, you get long-term capital gains treatment.
I see. Why do companies, or I apologize, let's start that question over. Why do startups implement a 4-year vesting schedule with a 1-year cliff?
The 1-year cliff I've discussed. It's just in case somebody doesn't work out, you don't have to give them any stock.
Yes.
So that's the 1-year cliff is straightforward. Why is it a 4-year vesting? It's not always a 4-year vesting. I've seen 5-year vesting. It's not quite as common, or at least it wasn't. And when have been giving it out, I've always used a 4-year vesting, because it's about the right time for somebody to get enough experience that you want to give them more options to keep them, and it also. So it works both ways. It motivates them because they're going to get more options quicker. But it's also good. It's also good for the company because things are happening on a relatively rapid basis.
Is there a dark side to it, Dave? Is there a way where companies can get, in a sense, screwed over?
Of course, there is. You can screw up everything. Um, but the government has, for the most part, put regulations in place into the way that options are handled and the way that the purchase of options is handling investing and all of that sort of thing, that it makes it less likely. There's one place where companies have made mistakes, and that's and you have to be very careful with this one. It is not the purpose of sale of options to buy stock.
Hmm.
When that money that comes into the company, you're not financing the company. That's not there to finance the company. So that stock is sold at a significantly reduced amount of money compared to the equal number of shares of stock that the investors get. Everybody agrees with this because you're not trying to finance the company on the backs of the employees. On the other hand, if it's too low, remember I said it sounds like compensation.
Hmm.
It now is looking like the difference between the fair market value and what you gave it to is compensation, and they have to pay taxes on it, and that's a really bad thing.
Yes.
So you really want them to have some relationship between what the investors got, is assuming you actually raised money, and what the option price of the stock is. 10 times is about right. I've seen it at 13, up to 13 or 14 times. I've seen it at a fourth. But somewhere in the range of a tenth is where most people try to go. It's a safe harbor. The government will let you get away with it.
Perfect. Now, Dave, this all sounds like it can get really complicated
Mm-hmm.
very quickly if you don't know what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is, how can I learn about this as a young entrepreneur that just started into business? Do I need to go to college to learn
No.
this? Do I
Now there are
need?
books and articles that can do it. And besides, if you have a decent controller or moderately senior person in your finance department, they will know it, and you trust them.
Perfect.
Yeah,
So hire somebody that
you're gonna
knows
hire
what they're
somebody who
doing
knows how to handle
with
it,
a good track record.
or you can hire a lawyer that does. Then
Perfect.
your lawyer will know. Your lawyer will draw up your stock option plan, or you and your lawyer, depending on how experienced you are,
Hmm.
will draw up your stock option plan. The board of directors approves the stock option plan, so everybody has looked at this thing before it goes into effect.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Dave, for telling me about stock options.
They're very important and they're very boring, except when somebody gets screwed or when somebody gets a lot of money coming in.
Before we end this, I have to ask you, have you ever seen somebody get screwed?
I have seen companies attempt to get rid of people right before the 1 year vesting, too close to the 1 year vesting. I've seen that. I have seen errors where there was not an adjustment in the stock option price when the investors were paying more. So now you got away from that 10 times thing, and we had to do corrections on those options. We made that mistake. It wasn't a serious one. There were no tax consequences because we fixed it very quickly. But yes, I've seen those kinds of mistakes. Um, I mean, there's always the usual, you don't file the plan properly and all that sort of stuff. I've never run into that problem because it's not that hard to get it right.
Tax mistakes can be very expensive.
Tax mistakes can be very expensive, and the one you really want to avoid with the employees is compensation for which there's no offsetting actual income.
Mm,
So in other words, that they have to pay taxes on something they're not getting any money to pay taxes with.
yes.
That's a real bad one because now you're really screwing over the employee.
Mhm. So if that mistake was made, if that mistake was, made by accident or however, and a certain employee needs to pay those taxes, would the company be obligated to pay those taxes for them
It is not obligated to pay those taxes for them, but any decent company would
because it's
because
their
it
mistake?
made the mistake.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Perfect.
they're not required to,
Hmm.
but they should.
Yes. And that comes from ethics.
Yeah, it's just
Just
an
an ethical
ethical
thing.
thing.
Alrighty, Dave. Well, thank you so much for
Well,
telling
thank
me.
you all for being here. Please, as usual, like and turn on notifications and subscribe.